Yo, what's going on, guys? Today I'm going to be giving you my spoiler-free review for the brand new Scream movie that just came out today. I just got out of the theater, and we're also going to be doing a spoiler review later on because Scream is, of course, part of a franchise that has a lot of spoilers. There's kills, there's a lot of big twists and reveals, so it's one of those things where it's just impossible to talk about everything without getting into spoilers. So this one's going to be mainly for the people who don't know if they want to see it yet and just want to kind of see other people's opinions on it before they decide to go see it, or people who just want to hear my thoughts on the movie, which if you've already seen it and you want to just hear my thoughts on it, you can hear it here because we're going to go through the positives of the movie, the negatives, and of course give it a final score at the end as we always do. This one was interesting because I just watched the Scream movies for the first time this year. We of course did that on this channel, and you guys loved those videos. Those were some of my best performing videos on this channel, and I love that franchise a lot. Those were some of my favorite movies that I watched this past year. I had a lot of fun with it. It ended up being one of my favorite horror franchises of all time just from those 4 movies. And that's pretty impressive because some of the other franchises that I really love have tons and tons of movies, and this one only has 4 of them. And honestly, I never felt like a single one of them was bad. There was not a single one that I thought was even below average. Even the third one, which is definitely my least favorite, was still pretty good. I still enjoyed it. It was still like a 6 out of 10, 7 out of 10, or something like that type movie for me. Thankfully, this one still is within that category where it's still not a bad movie, which is very, very good. So this franchise is still keeping that streak going. Hopefully it keeps that streak going forever because I'm fully expecting more Scream movies. There's no way this is it for Scream. Definitely going to be doing more after this one. I'm not sure if it's going to be connected to this movie or not, but I'm sure they're going to do more. There's no way they're just going to be done. Let's get into it though, starting off with the positives. The first big positive of this movie is that the tone was incredibly consistent with the other 4 Scream films. With a lot of horror franchises, they do so many movies to the point where you kind of have to change it up and you have to do some very different things, and I like when movies do that. Don't get me wrong, I love it. I'm a fan of franchises trying very different things, doing things that are very out there and crazy and wild, like Jason X. I actually really love Jason X for how insanely crazy it is. But Scream, there's only been 4 of them, and this one is another sequel. It's not a remake or anything. It's another one that's following up from the 4th film. It honestly could have been just called Scream 5, but it's not because for a few reasons, and we'll get into that, mainly for marketing, but also it fits in with the theme of the movie that they kind of, discuss. And it feels very much like the previous 4. It's in a very similar location. I mean, it literally uses the same locations as the first one in a lot of scenes, including, of course, Stu's house, which is not a spoiler because it was in the trailer, so if that's not a spoiler. It was literally all in the trailer. We saw Stu's house. But, they go to locations like that. It's obviously in Woodsboro. So, there's a lot of returning locations, of course, and returning feel because of that. It's not like somewhere very different than what we're used to. The tone, it feels the exact same. They have some comedy thrown in there, just like the other 4 did, but it's not too much comedy. The kills are kind of on par with the other films, but in some cases even better. It's very tonally consistent. There's no, crazy thing that just feels very unlike a Scream movie to do, and it sticks with that meta commentary that Scream movies love to do, and I absolutely love how they handle that in this film because it's definitely doing what Scream movies are supposed to do, where it's kind of keeping in touch with modern day, or I guess modern day for when the movie's coming out. It's keeping in touch with the current horror community essentially, and this movie focuses on that a lot. It talks about toxic fandoms, it talks about the whole requel thing, which is of course what Halloween 2018 essentially did, and a lot of other franchises are now doing the same thing where they kind of just forget all the sequels and just make it directly relate to the original. That's exactly what this one is doing as well. Even the kills kind of follow that format, and they even have a whole discussion about that within this film where they're talking about the fact that these kills are all relating back to the original. And I really like how that all plays out. The characters here are pretty good. Of course, we have the returning cast, which they are mostly handled well in this one. There's a few things I don't love about how they're handled, but for the most part, they're just as great as they were in the other ones. There's definitely not any moments where I'm like, that does not feel like that character. That character would not do that in this moment. No, they feel very much in touch with their character, which is really impressive, especially from an acting standpoint, because when you don't play a character that frequently, for these actors to just come back and just play the role so perfectly is just so impressive to me because, a lot of movies and franchises, they're playing the characters a year after another. But this is like, they've been playing this since 96, and they did one, or they did three within, that was a couple years, and then they did another one in 2011, which was like a 10-year gap, and then this one's a whole nother 10-year gap, which is just crazy. But they still just played so well as these characters, all three of them, even four if you want to count Deputy Hicks. I mean, she was only in Scream 4, but she was even great in this one. I mean, she wasn't in that much of it, but for the scene she was in, great job. But of course, our three main characters, Sydney, Gale, and Dewey, were fantastic in this one. They were honestly not the main characters, though. This felt much more like Star Wars The Force Awakens to me, and that's the best one I can relate it to. And they even talk about this in the film, and that this is exactly the case, is that Sydney's not the main character in this one anymore. This is essentially a Star Wars The Force Awakens film, or even you could compare it to Halloween 2018, where in Halloween 2018, the main character isn't necessarily Laurie Strode anymore. There's a new cast of characters that we kind of focus on. The legacy characters are just there to support what's going on. It relates to them, it all relates to them, but they're not the main focus. You could also relate that to The Force Awakens. Rey, Finn, Poe, they're the new cast, but the returning legacy characters are there to support the story, and things relate to them. And in a lot of ways, I like that a lot. I think that's the perfect way to go with this franchise. It definitely calls back to the original, which is good. There's a lot of nostalgia that we get in this film. It's honestly a love letter to the fans of the original film, which is fantastic, which is exactly what I expect them to do for a film like this. Some people might call it nostalgia baiting. I don't know, but I think it works just because there hasn't been that many Scream movies. If there was like 10, 15 something Scream movies, I would understand people not liking that, but because we haven't gotten one in 12 years or 11 years since, 2011 was the last one we had one, it makes sense to really have a lot of nostalgia come back to us. And if they want to do different sequels in the future, then they should definitely stop with the nostalgia baiting and just do something very new. But for this one, it works. You're returning the franchise after not being around for so long. It makes sense to try to reel us in with as much nostalgia as we can, and it all fits. It's not ruining any of that original stuff. It's not taking away from it. It's just making it better, in my opinion. I think a lot of it is made better in this film. There's some things that I wouldn't call retcons, but there's things where there's new information we're given that we didn't have before about the original, and I'm like, that kind of works. Like, that's not a problem. It doesn't ruin anything. It's actually kind of interesting, and I kind of like it. As for the new cast of characters, I struggled whether or not I should put this in the positives or the negatives because I'm kind of mixed on them. But as a whole, I like more of them than I don't. And it's not that I dislike any of them, it's more so that they don't really give them much time for us to learn anything about them, really. Some of them are very much one-dimensional, where we don't really know much about them beyond a couple little scenes they have, where we get to kind of feel what they would act like in a party setting. And that's about it. And I'm like, well, let me know some more. But the characters that I do like are mainly the ones that are connected to other characters in the film, and a lot of them are connected, which is kind of interesting. Like, for example, one of them is the nephew of Randy. Actually, two of them, I believe, are. And those ones, I was definitely enjoyable to watch them because they felt a lot like Randy. So I was like, okay, that's kind of fun to have Randy's nephews in here, and niece and nephew. And another one of them was the son of Deputy Hicks, which was also nice to see, and at least relate some characters to each other, so we kind of care about them more just because of that. And I do like that. And another thing is, with having the legacy characters returning, I wasn't as, I didn't feel like I needed the best, main cast in the world. So I was like, it's all right. But when it comes to the main character, which is, of course, her name is Sam, she's very present in the trailers, I really liked her character, so there's that. As long as I like the main character, I like the legacy characters, of course, and a couple of the side ones, I'm fine with it. There's just definitely 4 or 5 of them there, maybe less than that, like 3 or 4 or 5, that I just didn't care for because I didn't learn anything about them. So it was kind of hard to grasp on to much about them and really care about what's going on in that whole entire situation. You know what I mean? Like, care about when certain characters die, or when there's, serious moments with them. It's hard to care when it's like, you haven't given me enough, you know what I mean? And I almost feel like this film should have just done a couple more scenes with letting their characters build up a little bit so we care. But not all the Scream movies really do that, to be honest, so I don't really know if that's a necessary thing, which is why I'm kind of throwing in the positives, because some of them were really good, but it's kind of also mixed there as well, I guess. The kills in this movie were fantastic. Some of the best kills in the franchise. There's a couple in particular that actually made me cringe. which is not like the Scream franchise, because Scream is definitely not known for gory kills. Their kills are usually off screen or very, just a stab in the back or something very simple. But there's a couple kills here that are fucking awesome, like really gruesome, but not like over the top like Halloween. It's realistic and it's just gross, and I'm like, that's fucking great. Like, there's one in particular that I just was like, wow, that's good, and definitely impressed with how it was handled. And even some of the kills in that last half of the film, like the whole film has great kills. There's a couple that I feel like could have been a little bit better, but no, for a Scream movie, this is definitely the best kills we've ever seen by far. The last thing I want to say for positives is the killer reveal was definitely unpredictable. It was definitely unpredictable. But then we got to get into the negatives. Although the killer reveal was unpredictable, which is a good thing, it wasn't necessarily my favorite reveal in the world. And it wasn't a bad reveal. It wasn't like this is not, what it should be or whatever. It made sense, and there wasn't like any big plot holes to it. But it just felt underwhelming for me. Maybe not for everyone else. It was definitely a shock. I think that's something Scream has always done a great job with, is their killer reveals in terms of them being very surprising. They do a very good job of making it not surprising. I have always kind of been able to have someone on my suspect list. I'm like, okay, that person's a little bit suspicious, but I'm never like, oh, it's definitely them. You know what I mean? I'm never like that. It always kind of shocks me in the end, and especially like the third and fourth one were probably the more shocking ones. The first two felt like they weren't as shocking, but I loved like the motivation behind the killings and such. So I think it was something that made them a very, very good reveals. But this one's one that where it was surprising, and I was like, holy shit, I did not see that coming at all. But I just didn't like the motivation. I didn't like where it kind of led to that. I can't really say more without spoilers, so we're going to talk about that in the spoiler review. But if you've seen it, you probably know what I'm talking about. I'm not sure if you guys agree with that or not, but I don't know, a little underwhelming to me for the killer reveal. And the only other negative I can really think of, because there really aren't that many negatives, there's definitely a lot of scenes in this film where I'm like, that could have been shot in a way that wouldn't have been as messy. One example I have is one scene with Dewey, and it's not a spoiler, it's just a scene with Dewey where he completely misses shooting at Ghostface, and it's like you're 2 feet, he was like a couple feet from him. Like, there was no way that man was missing that shot, and that's a very big nitpick, but you could have just filmed that in a way where that wouldn't have looked so sloppily, because I don't believe he would have missed that shot from that up close. You know what I mean? I'm just like, come on, man, like, you know what I mean? And there's a couple other moments like that where it's like you could have just shot that in a different way, so it wouldn't have looked as like we have to force a character to do something kind of not stupid, but we have to force him to do something that I don't think would happen in that moment. But that's about it. That's really the only negatives I can think of. This movie did a lot of things right, and that is what I was looking for. I didn't need this to be the best horror film ever. I did not need this to be the best Scream ever, because it's not the best Scream ever. I'll say that right now. It is not my favorite Scream, but it's up there. It's definitely one of the better ones. There's definitely a couple missed opportunities as well. I can't go into much with that because, again, spoilers with some missed opportunities, but yeah, that's as much as I can say for a spoiler-free review, to be completely honest. For a rating, I'm going to give this film an 8.7 out of 10. I was really debating on what I wanted to give this film, if I wanted to give it something. It was definitely going to be around the mid-8s, but I think it deserves an 8.7 out of 10. You're wondering what I would give some of the other Scream movies. I'm planning on doing a ranking video of all the Scream films, so if you want to see my full thoughts on all the Scream movies, you can definitely see that, but definitely not my favorite Scream, definitely not my least favorite either. 8.7 out of 10 seems like a good rating to me. It's a good start for 2022, the first movie I watched this year, so that's definitely a good start for a solid, I would say great Scream movie that I thoroughly enjoyed. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Don't forget to check out my spoiler review after you've seen the movie, and also my Scream ranking when I release that. Peace out.